The elephant in the room, of course, is best posed through a question. Leave it to Beaver? Really? The show's so old-fashioned, so antiquated, so out of date. How can a young man like yourself, a so-called progressive, like such a show? Well, I was in the middle school when I discovered, thanks to syndication TV, this show, and it was 20 years old then, but somehow it captured my imagination. Maybe it was the novelty of it all, a show in black and white about two brothers growing up with two parents in a wholesome time. Maybe it was an inner longing for clear and easy answers at an age, both my age and years and the age I lived in, when such answers were hard to find. Maybe it was the precocious, indelible spirit of the main character for which the show was named, or maybe it was the experiencing of a father figure who was always present and engaged, both physically and emotionally. Unlike my own father, oftentimes, an introverted interstate bus driver who was not as present as Ward Cleaver was, for sure. From our 21st century enlightened day and age, quote unquote, however, Ward Cleaver and Leave It to Beaver is what enlightened, liberated minds now should laugh at and even disparage. Ward Cleaver in particular is a character that in our time is either a meaningless remnant of the past or a reminder of everything us modernists and postmodernists should be against. He represented a lie, an unattainable ideal of a father forced on us from above, an upper middle class man with a good job, enabling the building of a perfect suburban life, an always right and sugary nice figure, making him too good to be true, too perfect as a husband and a dad. Clearly prescribed gender roles with Ward as the go-to parent, the decider-in-chief, the proverbial head of the household. Ward and June never arguing and rarely even disagreeing. June rarely asserting her will as a mother, and when she did, Ward thinking what she thought through, and when he deemed them reasonable and fair, calmly implementing those ideas. A battle of wills never commenced. This was a manicured world, the manicured world of the Cleaver household. Even then it was all too perfect and too easy. Now it seems like a fiction, so sugar-coated that it amounts to a cake of just the frosting. That's what we're told, mostly. Yet, as a father of a 6-year-old who daily experiences and shares the wonders of ADHD, who lives the reality of nothing is perfect and it rarely is easy, I continue to be a fan of Leave It to Beaver. In fact, we weekly watch the show via Netflix as a family at dinner time, sometimes. I realize how uncool this is for a Gen X father. I realize that in front of a modern crowd, the whys would be loud and persistent. What about the shows on reality, even in its own time? What about the superficial, sappy portrayal of late 50s America? What about the gentle misogyny of the show and the times? Some may ask. Before I give my answer, I should say why this is sermon worthy or Sunday service worthy. Well, part of our roles as a religious and faithful people is to be ye in the world, but not of the world. Be ye in the world, but not of it. This means that from our heart of faith and religious practice, we should give voice to injustice, to wrongs, to harmful things in our society. If we are living the way of Jesus, there should be something somewhat countercultural about our steps, something that resists the whims and fancies of our culture. Cultural critique and even resistance is part of the gig of following the one named Jesus. And looking at the cultural phenomenon that was Leave It to Beaver and to modern thoughts on it helps us think through some of these things. So back to our question. Why is Leave It to Beaver significant and not an antiquated waste of time? First of all, it's a good show. It has aesthetic value. It's a classic for the reason that as far as sitcoms go, it set a standard of quality that was unmatched in its time and is still unmatched in many ways today. It remains funny, surprising, and enjoyable even today. Yes, the show is not realistic, but what sitcom even now is? Yes, I admit from our vantage point in the 21st century, the specific gender roles were unrealistic and old-fashioned. Even then, that was true for a lot of families. However, from the vantage point then, the show was in fact progressive. Yes, I say that again. The show then was in fact progressive. Why? How? Leave It to Beaver was actually the first show that placed at its center a child's frame of reference. The show is about the beaver and him living his life and experiencing his childhood in Mayfield. The show depicts the beaver's world as he sees it. According to English professor Barbara Growark, she states, when you are 7 years old, your mom is beautiful and wise, your dad is kind and wise, and your older brother, well, he's just amazing and general. Unquote. Ward Cleaver was actually applying a relatively new progressive style of parenthood and fatherhood. And that's the second point of why the show is progressive. It was in its time. So he was applying a new approach to parenthood and fatherhood put forward by Dr. Benjamin Spock. And in case you don't know, Dr. Spock in many ways was responsible for the beginning of what we can only call the children's movement. No one called it that, but it was a children's movement in that it seriously looked at how children were reared, voiced that we needed to do better, and we needed to do it differently, and called for change. And Dr. Spock was at the helm of this. See, the typical father at the time was the breadwinner first and foremost, and that was pretty much all. And according to sociologist David Witt, he says that as the geographical distance between the workplace and the home increased, so too did the father's direct involvement with his children. Similarly, as that distance increased, so too did the easy intellectual acceptance of the idea that males were unfit to have much of a hand in children's development. By the 1950s, father's involvement in the lives of his children had sunk to weekend interaction at best. He was effectively on his way out of the household in many cases. He had become a paycheck, an insurance policy, and an unknown parent. Unquote. My father, who fit the mold of a distant father like his own dad, was a product of this understanding of the father's role that David Witt describes. But Dr. Spock called for just the opposite, for the father to have a significant, major, central role in the lives of his children, especially his male children, as Wally and the Beaver, of course, were. And so Ward Cleaver is as present a father as there is. He is incredibly present, even by today's standards. What's more, Dr. Spock argued that being an authoritarian and using corporeal punishment, spanking, was both ineffective and harmful to the child, and so he urged against it. And Ward Cleaver in the show adhered to this. Unlike his father, as the character Ward often describes, he did not spank or use physical punishment, and while certainly being authoritative, he was not authoritarian, which is a big difference. Ward was a Dr. Spock kind of father, and so progressive in his time. But what about the feminist dartboard that is June Cleaver? The role has become synonymous with everything the modern woman should not be. The pearl-wearing, perfectly happy and the subservient role housewife in the suburbs. This anti-June Cleaver sentiment has relaxed a bit, but it's still there. But again, we have to consider the show from its context, which was the late 50s, early 60s, pre-feminism and pre-feminist mystique, the book that changed it all. And also consider this. The infamous wearing of pearls were more of a cinematographical decision than anything else. See, Barbara Billingsley, who played June Cleaver, had a deep hollow in her neck. And the old filming style in that day produced a distractive and unappealing shadow on her neck. And so they covered it up with pearls or a turtleneck or scarves, which solved the problem. As for the high heels that she was often wearing, even doing household chores like vacuuming, well, they were used later in the show because the boys were beginning to outgrow her. And kids taller than their parents in TV world could not happen. The parents had to be taller and look over their young ones. And also, did you know, this was an amazing fact I found out, that the character of June Cleaver, she went to college, and she even graduated from college, and she met Ward while at college. So June Cleaver was a college graduate, which in those days was quite rare. And then there is this scene.
Girls are kind of lucky, don't they, Mom?
Why do you say that?
Well, they don't have to be smart. They don't have to get jobs or anything. All they gotta do is get married.
Well, Beaver, being smart isn't exactly a drawback to marriage.
Well, if they don't get married, well, they can become dressmakers or cut people's nails in a barber shop or take care of kids and a lot of other dumb stuff.
Well, Beaver, today girls can be doctors and lawyers, too, you know. They're just as ambitious as boys are.
You mean there's no dumb people left in the world, Mom?
Beaver, is something bothering you?
Well, kind of, Mom. We're having an intelligence test tomorrow in school, and I don't know if I'm going to pass.
Oh, Beaver. Beaver, of course you will. Your father did very well in school, and I got good grades. You had a grandfather that was a professor. Why, he was considered practically a genius.
Yeah, it's nice having all that smart stuff in the family, Mom. I just hope it didn't all get worn out before it came to me.
All of that said, let's face it, Leave It to Beaver is idyllic and idealistic. It is a fictional TV show and far from reality. And it's far from reality TV in every way. But even our reality TV is not reality. In fact, it is both delusional and dangerous. Our age of reality TV offers us not reality, only hyperactive, hyperviolent, hypersexed media and divisive news and politics. Considering the delusional and dangerous entertainment industrial complex all around us, isn't Leave It to Beaver mostly preferable? After all, Ward and June were able to watch Walter Cronkite calmly present the news once a day instead of 24/7 news stations blaring opinions and frustration. And he was respected for claiming the truth and claiming that the Vietnam War was wrong. The Cleavers did not have to worry about the corrupting vices accessed so easily on cable TV and the internet. The schools his boys went to were not overrun by drugs and alcohol binge parties or guns, or even by a system of little music, little recess, and standardized test after standardized test. Yes, such simplicity is alluring in a day of too much information and of almost anything and everything else. Certainly the South was still segregated, and Jim Crow waved the flag of oppression. Certainly teenage angst and repression ominously moved beneath the surface. Gays and lesbians lived behind not only closet doors, but in fear of being who they were. But some things were still respected. A civility still could be found. Community still seemed a possibility. In other words, for me, watching Leave It to Beaver serves as a kind of respite away from the chaos of modern life, for sure, but it also serves as a dream, a myth that, even though not quite attainable, at least it can be hoped for. Ward and the Cleaver family in general serve as a comforting myth. It is a myth moved by nostalgia for an age that never really existed, yet one we'd like to exist minus a few things. It is a myth we inwardly wish we could conjure in order to save our time. As for Ward Cleaver, he acts as the mythological god of fatherhood. And like mythological gods, Apollo, Zeus, Venus, etc., there are indeed vulnerabilities and weaknesses therein. He is not completely perfect, and thus not completely inaccessible. But despite them, those vulnerabilities and imperfections, the power of wisdom and compassion that he embodies overcomes the lax and rules the day, making it seem in the end a little bit better. Yes, in the end we must face reality without the gloss. Ward Cleaver is fictional, as is where he lived and who he loved. Mayfield is not a real town. This is the reality we must face. And we must live in our own reality. Yet we sometimes need mythologies and dreams to move us along. And I end this look at Reverend Hugh Beaumont and the show that made him famous with one of my favorite scenes from the show. It kind of serves as a post-Father's Day tribute. And the setup for this clip is this. Beaver has to write a school paper about the most interesting character he has ever met. And he decides to write it about his father, Ward. But he has a hard time deciding what to write because his father's life is, well, pretty bland, which interestingly is a word often used to describe depictions of the 1950s. The scene shows the final result of the Beaver's process, and the paper that the Beaver ends up writing is poignant and lovely. And in our star-crazed, our star-obsessed, and our superficial world, it speaks volumes, and so it's a good way to end.
Sunday afternoon, you're not out playing?
I'm still working on my interesting composition for school.
You having trouble with it, Beaver?
Well, I wrote up one, but it sounded dumb. And then Wally helped me write up another. It sounded okay, but it was all made up stuff.
Well, I know you're proud of your father, and it's only natural that you want to make him sound as interesting as possible, but you have to tell the truth.
Well, I tried that the first time, but it came out like Dad isn't.
Well, Beaver, if you try to write down how you feel about your father and what he means to you, instead of just trying to say what he does, it might come a lot easier.
I'll try it, Mom. But you know something? I never knew before you had to do any thinking to be a writer.
Mike, did we sell the house yet? Enough people came to look at it yesterday.
Mr. Jackson is calling us today to let us know if the people with the beach lot will meet our price.
Boy, I hope they take it. It's we're sure getting tired of keeping our room clean.
We sort of hoped it might become a habit.
Oh, sure, Dad.
Well, Beaver, where have you been?
I've been up recopying my composition, Mom. The first one had all kinds of fingerprints on it.
Well, let's hear it.
Oh, you don't want to hear it, Dad.
No, Dad, you sure don't.
Well, of course I do. The least I can do is to check it for punctuation.
Well, okay. But don't get any fingerprints on it.
Yeah. The most interesting character I have ever known is my father, Mr. Ward Cleaver. Mister.
That counts as a word, Dad.
He does not have an interesting job. He just works hard and takes care of all of us. He never shot things in Africa or not saved anybody that was drowning. But that's all right with me because when I am sick, he brings me ice cream. And when I tell him things or ask things, he always listens to me. And he would use up a whole Saturday to make junk with me in the garage. He may not be interesting to you or someone else because he's not your father, just mine.
I don't know if it sounds so good, Dad. But it sure made me feel good when I was writing it.
I'm glad it did, Beaver. Made me feel pretty good to read it, too. Well, here. I don't think I got any fingerprints on it.
Those two up there, they're mine.